across the galaxy. Her name was whispered like a curse, the Queen of Shadows. To some, she was a savior of her people. To others, she was a monster. Worlds fell under her rule, fleets burned in the dark void of space, and empires trembled whenever her banners appeared. She did not need to shout. She did not need to plead. Her reputation spoke louder than any weapon. Wherever she walked, silence followed, and behind her, death always came. She had ruled for centuries with an iron will. Her eyes glowed crimson, her armor black as night, and her voice carried the weight of command. Those who obeyed her were rewarded with survival. Those who defied her were erased from history. Entire races remembered her name with fear, teaching their children never to speak it aloud. For to speak her name was to call down destruction. But power always comes with loneliness, and even queens can grow tired of being feared. On the farthest edge of the galaxy, among broken colonies and forgotten stars, lived a man who was not special. He had no army, no title, no crown. His name was Kale, a human wanderer who carried only scars from battles that were not his own. He drifted from planet to planet, searching for something that even he could not name. He was a man lost in the endless stars, yet fate had chosen him for something greater. Their meeting was not written in royal halls or shining palaces. It was written in fire and ruin. One night, Kale stumbled onto a battlefield that stretched across the horizon. The ground was scorched, ships burned in the distance, and the air was heavy with the smell of smoke. He walked carefully, thinking the place empty, until he saw her, the Queen of Shadows. Not as the galaxy imagined her, seated on a throne of steel, surrounded by her endless armies, but standing alone, her once perfect armor broken, her crown shattered, her blade dripping with the last of her enemy's blood. She was wounded, her breath heavy, her strength fading with every step, yet her eyes still burned with fire, and even broken, she looked more dangerous than any warrior Kale had ever seen. Every instinct told him to run, to hide, to kneel, or to beg for his life. But Kale was different. He did not fear her the way others did. Instead, he looked at her as if she were simply human. And in that silence between them, he did something no one had ever dared to do. He spoke. "If you are only feared, you will always be alone," Kale said slowly, his voice steady. "But if you want more than fear, follow me." The words cut deeper than any blade. The queen froze, her crimson eyes narrowing, expecting mockery, expecting betrayal. But Kale did not bow. He did not tremble. He simply stood there, as if her power meant nothing. And in that moment, something changed within her. For centuries, she had commanded armies and crushed kings. Yet no one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever seen her as more than a weapon. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Queen of Shadows did not raise her sword. She listened. Far away, the galaxy stirred. Whispers spread like fire in the dark. If the Queen of Shadows had lowered her blade before a human, what did it mean for the rulers who feared her? If a simple man could crown her with something greater than fear, what destiny awaited her now? Kale did not know it yet, but his words had lit a spark in the heart of the most feared woman in existence. And that spark would burn brighter than any war. The galaxy was about to change forever, because the Queen of Shadows had found someone who was not afraid to stand against her, and perhaps someone worth standing beside. This was not the end of her legend. This was only the beginning. The galaxy believed the Queen of Shadows was untouchable. Her fleets spread across the stars, her power endless, her enemies countless. But on that ruined battlefield, she faced something stranger than any weapon. A single human who refused to kneel. Kale had no armor, no soldiers, no crown. His hands were scarred, his clothes torn, his eyes steady. When he spoke, his words were simple, but they carried more weight than the thunder of her armies. "If fear is all you have, then you will always be empty. Follow me if you want something more." For a moment, silence ruled. The queen could have ended him with one swing, her blade sharp enough to cut through steel and bone alike. But instead, she lowered it, the fire in her crimson eyes flickering with something even she did not understand. Curiosity. No one had ever stood before her without trembling. No one had dared to offer her anything but obedience or death. Yet here was this human, fragile by nature, daring by spirit, who looked at her as if she was not a monster but a woman. And that difference unsettled her more than any battle. Still, she was not ready to admit it. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice sharp, carrying the echo of 1,000 executions. Kel did not flinch. "You are someone who has forgotten how to be more than feared," he answered calmly. The words struck her deeper than any blade, because somewhere within her, beneath the years of blood and conquest, she remembered. Long ago, before she became the Queen of Shadows, she had been a child of war. Her family taken, her world burned, her crown forged not from honor, but from survival. Fear had been her shield, her weapon, her throne, and over centuries, it had consumed her until she had become the very darkness she once fought against. Now, this human stood before her, reminding her of the truth she had buried. That fear was not strength, it was a chain. Her heart ached, though she would never show it. Instead, she laughed bitterly. "You are a fool, human. Do you think you can change me?" Kale's answer was simple. "I don't need to change you. I only need you to see yourself." The queen turned away, but her hand trembled on the hilt of her blade. She could not kill him, and that frightened her more than any enemy. For the first time in centuries, she had met someone who did not see her as a goddess of war, but as something more, and against her will, she followed him. The galaxy did not understand. Reports spread through the star systems, whispers carried by traitors and spies. The Queen of Shadows had been seen walking beside a human, not as a ruler commanding a slave, but as an equal. This rumor alone sent ripples of panic. If she had chosen a human above kings, what did it mean? If she had listened to him, who could ever feel safe again? Rulers gathered in secret chambers, their voices shaking with fear. "She has found a new weapon," one declared. "No," another answered. "She has found something worse than a weapon. She has found hope." Kale did not know the storm his words had begun. He only knew that the queen, the most feared woman in the galaxy, was walking beside him through the ashes of war. Her gaze was sharp, her silence heavy, but for the first time, she was not walking alone. And somewhere, deep in her heart, hidden under layers of iron and fire, she wondered, could she truly be more than fear? Could she truly stand as something greater than the shadow she had become? The question burned within her, and though she hated it, she could not let it go. Kale said nothing more. He only walked forward, and she followed. Not as a queen above her subject, not as a conqueror above her prey, but as a woman searching for something she had lost long ago. The galaxy was watching, the empires were trembling, and the Queen of Shadows was changing. Whether she admitted it or not, her story had just begun. The Queen of Shadows walked beside a human. To the galaxy, this was more dangerous than war. Kings and councils whispered in secret, terrified that her new path meant something they could not predict. They had built their power on her being a monster. But now, with a single human at her side, she seemed less like a nightmare and more like a legend reborn. Kale did not ask her to swear loyalty, nor did he kneel to her crown. He only walked forward, silent and calm, his presence steady like a light in endless darkness. The queen hated it, and yet she could not turn away. For centuries, fear had ruled her, and now this human's simple courage pulled her into a world she had never imagined. Their journey carried them through forgotten systems. Small colonies, poor and broken, lived in terror of her fleets. When the queen entered these places, people froze, expecting death. But Kale forced her to see what she had created. A boy hiding behind rubble, a mother clutching her child, an old man lowering his eyes in terror. These were not warriors, they were survivors of her shadow. At first she tried to ignore it. This is the price of power, she told herself, but the words sounded hollow. For the first time, she looked at her rule not as strength, but as a wound upon the galaxy. And Kale saw the doubt in her eyes. You can't end this, he said softly, or you can continue to be nothing but fear. The words struck her like fire. No soldier had ever dared to challenge her will. No general had ever spoken to her as an equal. Yet this human, with no crown, no throne, dared to say she was wrong. And worse, she felt the truth in his voice. Still, the galaxy was not silent. Whispers turned into rebellion. Small factions began to rise, believing that if the queen had grown weak enough to follow a human, then perhaps her empire could be broken. Spies carried rumors, smugglers spread tales, and slowly, resistance lit across the stars. Her generals demanded answers. My queen, you cannot walk beside this creature. The empires are laughing at us, one shouted. Another knelt in fear. Say the word, and we will kill him. Your throne must not be stained by a human. But when Kale stood in the throne chamber, surrounded by blades, the queen raised her hand. No, she said coldly, her crimson eyes burning. No one touches him. The generals froze, confusion spreading across their faces. Why would the most feared ruler in the galaxy defend a human? Why would she call him untouchable? The queen herself did not know the answer, only that Kale had shown her something she could not erase. And if he died, so too would the fragile hope she had begun to feel. Outside her empire, enemies prepared for war. A council of rulers gathered, their voices sharp with fear. If the Queen of Shadows has chosen a human, then she is no longer what she was, one declared. Then we strike now, another agreed, before she becomes something greater than all of us. The galaxy trembled on the edge of fire. Kale knew nothing of the armies rising, the rebellions forming, the plans being drawn in the dark. He only knew that the queen walked beside him, her silence heavier than words. And though she would not admit it, she was changing. At night, she stared at the stars, her crown beside her, her hand resting on her blade. She remembered the girl she once was, the child who had lost everything, who had chosen fear as a shield. And she wondered if Kale was right, if there was more to her than shadows. But deep in her heart, another question burned brighter. If she chose hope instead of fear, would the galaxy follow her? Or would it destroy her? The queen did not know the answer, but she knew one thing. With Kale at her side, the galaxy would never see her the same way again. The Queen of Shadows had always ruled with fear. Her soldiers obeyed because they knew disobedience meant death. Her generals followed because her wrath was swifter than their ambition. But now, with Kale walking beside her, the very foundation of her empire began to shake. Whispers spread through the ranks. Some claimed she had lost her strength, that a human had bewitched her. Others feared she was planning something greater, something beyond war. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Her armies no longer marched with the same certainty. Kale noticed it first. He saw how the soldiers stared at him, how their hands tightened on their weapons when he passed. They could not understand why their queen would defend him, why she would risk her empire for a man with no throne. Kale said nothing, but he knew the danger growing inside her own walls. One night, as the queen prepared to meet her council, Kale stopped her. You rule them with chains of fear, he said quietly. But fear breaks sooner or later, and when it breaks, it will turn against you. She narrowed her eyes, her pride burning. They have never broken, she replied sharply. They will, Kale answered, because no one chooses chains. They only endure them until they find a key. His words echoed in her mind as she entered the chamber. Her generals knelt, her council bowed, yet she felt the doubt crawling beneath their obedience. One voice rose above the silence. My queen, a commander said boldly, the galaxy laughs at us. Enemies rise in rebellion, and all because of him. He pointed at Kale, who stood calmly at the edge of the room. Give us the order, and we will cut him down where he stands. and your throne will be strong again." The chamber froze, waiting for her word. The Queen of Shadows stood tall, her crimson eyes glowing like fire. Her blade sang as she drew it, and for a heartbeat the council believed she would strike Kale. Instead, she turned and cut through the commander who had spoken, her voice cold as ice. "Anyone who dares raise a hand against him, dares raise a hand against me." The room trembled with silence. Kale's expression did not change, but he knew the price of her choice. By defending him, she had split her empire in two: those who would follow her into the unknown, and those who would betray her in the shadows. Later, when they were alone, Kale spoke again. "You cannot kill doubt with a blade," he said softly. "If you want loyalty, you must give them more than fear." The queen turned away, her pride clashing with the truth in his words. "What you know of ruling," she snapped. "Enough to see that you are already losing what you built," Kale replied, his tone calm. Her hand tightened on her sword, but she did not strike, because deep inside, she knew he was right. Beyond her empire, enemies were moving. Rebel fleets gathered in secret. Councils forged alliances, and spies whispered of her weakness. Some claimed the Queen of Shadows was no longer the terror of the stars, but a woman divided. And divided empires are easy to destroy. Yet, for every enemy that plotted against her, there were also those who began to hope. Colonies she had once crushed began to whisper a different story. That perhaps the queen had changed. That perhaps she could become more than the monster of their nightmares. These whispers spread like fire, and soon the galaxy no longer knew what to believe. The queen felt the storm closing in. Her throne was not as solid as it once was. Her armies no longer unquestioning. Her enemies no longer paralyzed by fear. But when she looked at Kale, she saw the one thing she had never found in centuries of war. A man who would not kneel. A man who would not tremble. A man who spoke to her as if she were more than her crown. And though she hated it, though it tore at her pride, she clung to that. For the first time in her endless reign, the Queen of Shadows had chosen not just to rule, but to stand beside someone. And that choice would either save her empire or burn it to ashes. The Queen of Shadows had defended Kale before her council. Her blade had silenced one commander, but silence does not kill doubt. In the shadows of her empire, whispers grew louder. Some of her generals still obeyed out of loyalty, but others sharpened their knives, waiting for the moment to strike. Kale saw the danger before she did. He had lived among men long enough to know the look of betrayal hiding behind bowed heads. "They are afraid," he told her, "but not of you anymore. They are afraid of what you are becoming." She frowned, crimson eyes narrowing. "And what am I becoming?" she asked. "Someone they cannot control," Kale answered calmly. The queen hated the truth in his words. For centuries, she had been the hand of fear itself. Every order carried out without question, every throne trembling beneath her shadow. But now, her choice to protect a human had cracked the foundation of her empire. And through that crack, rebellion burned. It came first as whispers in the barracks, then as secret meetings in the dark, until one night, it exploded into fire. Her palace shook with betrayal. Soldiers she had once trusted turned their weapons on her guards. Explosions ripped through the halls, flames painting the black stone red. The queen stood tall amidst the chaos, her blade singing with each strike. She cut down traitors with a fury that reminded them why she was feared. But no matter how many she killed, the betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Because this was not an enemy fleet or a foreign king. This was her own blood turning against her. Kale fought beside her, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. He was no soldier, yet his courage burned brighter than any warrior. And as he stood shoulder to shoulder with the queen, the soldiers who still remained loyal felt their fear shift. For the first time, they did not see their queen as a monster commanding shadows. They saw her as a leader who bled, who fought, who defended more than her crown. When the fires finally dimmed, half her palace lay in ruins. The floor was painted with the blood of her own men. The queen's armor was cracked, her body weary, but her spirit unbroken. Yet her heart was heavy, heavier than it had ever been. She had ruled with fear, and now fear had betrayed her. Kale stood beside her in the silence of the wreckage. "This is what I warned you," he said softly. "Fear chains, but chains break." Her hand trembled on her sword, though her voice remained cold. "They were weak," she said, but the words rang hollow in her own ears. Kale did not argue. He only looked at her, and that gaze pierced deeper than any blade. News of the betrayal spread across the galaxy faster than fire. The great empires saw weakness and prepared to strike. The rebels found hope and gathered in greater numbers. And the people, the simple colonies who had once feared her name, began to wonder. If the Queen of Shadows could be betrayed, if she could bleed, then perhaps she was not a monster at all. For the first time, they whispered not of her cruelty, but of her survival. And that whisper grew into something she could not control. Hope. The queen hated the word, but she could not deny its power. Her throne no longer rested on terror alone. It rested on a question that spread across the stars like lightning. If the Queen of Shadows could fight beside a human, if she could bleed for her crown, then what else could she become? In the darkness of her ruined palace, the queen stared at Kale. Her voice was low, her pride burning against her doubt. "You have changed everything," she whispered, "and I do not know if I should kill you or thank you." Kale's answer was calm, steady, unshaken. "Neither," he said. "Just keep walking forward. The galaxy will follow, or it will burn, but you must decide which." And in her heart, for the first time in centuries, the Queen of Shadows wondered if she had found not just a shield, not just a sword, but something she had never known. A reason. The betrayal within her own palace had left scars deeper than wounds. The Queen of Shadows stood in the ruins of her throne, her armor cracked, her crown scorched by fire. She had slain traitors with her blade, silenced whispers with blood, yet doubt still clung to her empire like smoke after battle. And beyond her borders, the galaxy had seen the weakness. The rulers of rival empires gathered in secret. Old enemies who once trembled beneath her shadow now whispered plans of war. "She bleeds." One said, "She falls," another replied. For centuries they had feared her wrath, but now they smelled blood in the air. They forged an alliance of fleets greater than any single empire had ever commanded. And for the first time in generations, the galaxy united, not in fear of her, but in the hope of destroying her. Kale saw the storm coming long before it reached them. He had no throne, no council, but he had lived enough to know that fear turns to fire when weakness shows. "They will come for you," he told her, his voice steady. "Not one empire, not two, but all of them, because they fear what you are becoming." The queen's crimson eyes narrowed, her pride refusing to bend. "Then let them come," she said coldly. "I will show them that the Queen of Shadows is still death itself." But Kale shook his head. "If you fight them as you always have, you will lose," he said, "not because you are weak, but because they're united, and fear cannot hold against unity." Her blade trembled in her hand, not from fear, but from anger. She wanted to strike him down for daring to speak such words, yet she knew his voice carried truth. Her empire was crumbling, her enemies gathering, and for the first time in centuries, she could not win through fear alone. The storm broke sooner than expected. Scouts reported fleets moving across the stars. Thousands of warships painted with the banners of every enemy she had ever made. The void lit with fire as the great alliance struck. Her borders burned, her outposts fell, and her loyal soldiers died with her name on their lips. The Queen of Shadows marched to war, her crimson eyes burning, her blade shining with blood. She fought like the legend she was, every strike shaking the battlefield, every roar echoing through the stars. But no matter how many she killed, no matter how many fleets she shattered, the tide did not stop. For every ship destroyed, 10 more took its place, For every enemy slain, 100 more marched forward. Kale stood beside her, fighting with nothing but courage, his voice steady amidst the chaos. He was no general, no king, yet his presence was like iron, unshakable. The soldiers who still remained loyal looked to him in secret, seeing not just their queen's shadow, but the light of something greater. For Kale did not fight for a throne, he fought for her, and that difference spread through their ranks like fire. Still, the war dragged on. Planets burned, stars choked with smoke, fleets torn apart in endless battles. The queen stood tall, her body bleeding, her crown heavy, yet her spirit unbroken. But even she knew the truth. This was not a war she could win alone, and she hated it. Hated that the words of a human echoed in her heart louder than the screams of her enemies. You cannot rule the galaxy with fear anymore, Kale said to her as the fires of war raged around them. If you want to survive, if you want to win, then give them more than shadows to follow. The queen's pride clashed with her doubt, her voice sharp as a blade. And if I cannot, she asked, then you will fall, Kale answered, his eyes steady. But if you can, then you will not just be feared, you will be remembered. The words burned in her heart. For centuries, her name had been spoken with terror, her shadow stretching across the stars. But now, standing in the fire of rebellion and war, she faced a choice she had never imagined: to remain a monster of fear, or to become something greater. The galaxy was watching. The Great Alliance moved closer, fleets darkening the stars. Her throne stood on the edge of ruin, her armies weary, her empire bleeding. And at her side stood a single human, fragile yet unyielding. Together, they faced the storm, and the Queen of Shadows knew the next battle would not only decide her throne, it would decide what kind of legend she would become. The storm had come. The alliance of empires, forged by fear and hate, stretched across the stars like a tidal wave. Worlds shook as their fleets burned toward the throne of the Queen of Shadows. It was the greatest force the galaxy had ever seen, united by one purpose: to end her reign forever. The queen stood at the heart of her shattered empire, her crimson eyes glowing against the darkness. Her blade had cut down traitors. Her hands had spilled oceans of blood, and yet for the first time in centuries, she knew she could not win this war with fear alone. Her soldiers were weary, her fleets broken, and her enemies endless. But at her side stood Kale, the human who refused to kneel, the man who had given her words sharper than any sword. You cannot fight them all, Kale said, his voice steady as the thunder of enemy cannons filled the void. They do not fear you anymore, but they can still follow you, if you give them something more. She turned her gaze on him, her pride burning like fire. And what more can I give? She asked. Yourself, Kale answered. Not the Queen of Shadows, but the woman beneath the crown, the one who still remembers what it means to fight for something greater than fear. The words cut deeper than any wound. For centuries, she had been nothing but a weapon, a monster cloaked in shadows. But now, as the fires of war closed in, she faced the truth she had long denied. She was more than fear, and for the first time, she let the galaxy see it. When the enemy fleets descended, they expected a monster cloaked in darkness. Instead, they saw a queen who bled, who burned, who stood not above her people, but beside them. She raised her sword high, her voice echoing across the calms. I am no longer your shadow, she declared. I am your fire, and I will not burn alone. Her soldiers roared, not with fear, but with loyalty. For the first time, they followed her not because of chains, but because they believed. The battle that followed was unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Fleets clashed, worlds shook, the sky lit with endless fire. And through it all, the Queen of Shadows fought not as a monster, but as a leader, a warrior, a woman reborn. Kale stood at her side, fighting with nothing but courage, his presence a shield stronger than steel. He was no emperor, no commander, yet his spirit burned brighter than any crown. The soldiers who saw him fight whispered his name, and those whispers spread even as cannons tore through their ships. The human who stood with the queen, the man who gave her back her soul. The alliance fought with fury, their numbers endless, their hatred deep. But unity born of fear is fragile, and as the queen's forces pushed back with fire and belief, cracks began to form. Old grudges rose, mistrust spread, and the great alliance began to falter. For fear can unite for a time, but hope can break even the strongest chains. When the final battle ended, the void was littered with broken ships and burning worlds. The queen stood bloodied but unbroken, her crown cracked, her blade heavy in her hand. She had not crushed the galaxy into silence. She had changed it. Her enemies had failed to kill her, and worse, they had made her into something stronger than fear. A legend. In the silence after war, the colonies whispered her name not as a curse, but as a vow. She was no longer the Queen of Shadows. She was the Queen of Fire, the woman who had stood against the galaxy and burned brighter than all of it. And beside her stood Kale, the human who had crowned her not with jewels or iron, but with truth. He looked at her, his voice calm as ever. "You were feared across the stars," he said softly, "but now you are more than that. Now you are remembered." Her crimson eyes softened, though her pride did not fade. "You have given me a crown greater than any throne," she whispered. And though she would never say the word aloud, in her heart she knew he was not her subject, not her servant, but her equal. The galaxy would never be the same, for the queen who was once feared now stood as a legend reborn. And it began because one human dared not to kneel,